Does anybody else remember the time when Magnum P.I. very nearly played one of the most iconic adventure characters of all time in Indiana Jones?
What?
Folks, you heard that right. Just as Al Pacino very nearly stole the role of Han Solo out of Harrison Ford's carpenter-blistered hands, Tom Selleck, one of the most iconic mustaches in Hollywood history, was very nearly the casting choice for Indiana Jones. And my God, what a different series of movies that could have been. See, it's not just that Harrison Ford is now one of the most iconic actors of all time due to his roles in franchises that are still ongoing today, but it's also interesting just considering how different of an actor Tom Selleck is and was in the 80s compared to Indiana Jones.
People are trying to kill him. I know, Dad!
But it's not just that Tom Selleck was in talks for the role. No, in fact, if it wasn't for a very simple single signature on a very simple TV show contract, Indiana Jones would have been played by Tom Selleck. So he wasn't just a casting option, he was the definitive choice, and if everything had aligned the way the studio wanted to, we would never have seen Harrison Ford in this iconic role. So this is that story. So brace yourselves and let's get into it.
Don't you?
No. Do you?
One of the most infamous casting near misses of all time is definitely Tom Selleck as Indiana Jones. While it's not unusual for actors to turn down huge roles that eventually become iconic, with pretty much every major leading man of the 80s inexplicably turning down Die Hard.
Welcome to the party, pal!
One that tends to blow people's minds is the fact that Tom Selleck very, very nearly played Indiana Jones. In fact, he was actually hired to do the part, but he had to back out due to a contract he had already signed to do a little show called Magnum P.I. While one could argue that things turned out just fine for Selleck as Magnum P.I. made him the biggest television star of the 80s, it had to have stuck in his craw that Raiders of the Lost Ark made Harrison Ford the biggest movie star on the planet. What's worse is how it was an open secret, with Selleck constantly having to revisit the casting near miss in interview after interview. Even now, he's constantly reminded of his brush with everyone's favorite bullwhip-wielding archaeologist.
In hell! Oh! Put out the way!
But, given Harrison Ford's history with producer George Lucas, why was he only the second choice to play a role he was so clearly born to play? Let's get into it. So when Star Wars hit theaters in 1977, it made Harrison Ford into a star, but he had been toiling in the Hollywood trenches for years without much success. While he had a nice role in American Graffiti, his career was going so poorly that he famously made ends meet as a carpenter.
Yes. So I have a
He had stayed close with George Lucas in the years after American Graffiti, but at the time, Lucas was wary of reusing the same actors over and over again in his movies. He didn't really fancy building himself a stock company, which is why many other actors were actually considered to play Han Solo, including Kurt Russell and John Travolta. Yet, Ford nailed the audition and ended up with the part. And you know what? Made him a superstar, with him immediately graduating to headlining movies of the late 70s, such as the Guns of Navarone sequel Force 10 from Navarone, The Frisco Kid with Gene Wilder, and his solo starring debut, the World War II movie Hanover Street. Of course, every single one of those movies was a huge box office flop. And while he still had The Empire Strikes Back to look forward to, people kind of figured that Harrison Ford, superstar, wasn't really going to happen. At the same time, Tom Selleck was a leading man without all that much distinction on the small screen. He'd headlined a number of failed TV pilots, but none had really caught on. However, he did have a tiny role in the 1978 hit Coma, where he played a doomed patient, and in the part, he got his shirt off, sported his trademark mustache for the first time, and was pretty charming, and people noticed.
Well, the suspense is really killing me. I thought you doctors liked to operate.
He also had a solid recurring role in the Rockford Files as a private eye, which led to him being offered the leading role as Thomas Magnum in Magnum P.I. He filmed the pilot in Hawaii, and that was that for a while because it didn't look like CBS was actually going to pick the show up.
Don't even think it. Nobody's that fast.
At the same time, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg were getting ready to launch Raiders of the Lost Ark, which would mark the debut of whip-wielding archaeologist Indiana Jones. Knowing the franchise potential they had, Lucas and Spielberg wanted to emulate what Arbor Broccoli and Harry Saltzman had done with the James Bond series. Basically, hire an unknown actor, get him cheap, and groom him for stardom, but also have him on board for a whole slew of movies without having to break the bank.
Bond. James Bond.
And many actors tested for the part, including Harry Hamlin, who made Clash of the Titans the same year, John Shee, Sam Elliott, can you imagine that one? And Tim Matheson. Yet, of all of them, it was Selleck who, still sporting his Magnum P.I. mustache, really nailed the part. If you look at his screen test, which is kind of all over the place, you can see why Selleck would have likely been just as successful as Harrison Ford in the role, as he nails the scenes he's reading, such as his screwball encounter with Marion. Everyone wanted him for the part, and while it looked like he would get it, his option to do Magnum P.I. wasn't quite expired. It was going to expire in 10 days. Certainly nothing could go wrong in 10 days, right? Oh boy.
Big as you, yo-yo.
So what happened? Simple. CBS, hearing that Selleck was in high demand by Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, the two biggest directors of their time, suddenly figured that maybe they had something with him as Magnum P.I., so they greenlit the show. History would actually be repeated later in the decade when NBC did the same thing to Pierce Brosnan when he was hired to play James Bond in 1986, just as Remington Steele was apparently wrapping up. However, NBC greenlit another season, meaning that Brosnan lost the part. While Brosnan did eventually play James Bond,
The name's Bond. James Bond.
Selleck never got his chance to play Indiana Jones. And what's worse is that there was a Screen Actors Guild strike that led to the delay of Magnum P.I. ever being filmed, and he really could have done both roles. Of course, that was impossible to know at the time. Now, one thing worth saying about Tom Selleck is that he probably could have played the role had he thrown some kind of a fit or resorted to some weird tactics to get himself fired from Magnum P.I. People did ask him about it over the years. In an interview, he said, "Look, some people said you've got to get into a car and drive into a brick wall and get injured and get out of Magnum and do Raiders. And I said, I got to look my mom and dad in the eye, and we don't do that. So I did Magnum, and that's not so bad, is it?" Indeed, it wasn't bad at all. Selleck went on to major success on Magnum P.I., winning an Emmy, and the show ran for most of the decade. And it was really one of the most popular shows of his era. And Tom Selleck was a household name. As for Ford, given the fact that he was already so well known when he signed on for Raiders, they had to pay him a nice 7-figure salary for one movie only.
No ticket.
However, even if Lucas was wary on being overly reliant on Ford, it worked out pretty well as his star and director Steven Spielberg worked exceptionally well together, with Spielberg even hiring Harrison Ford's wife at the time, Melissa Matheson, to write E.T., which she did brilliantly. Ford himself was actually supposed to cameo as Elliot's school principal, but the scene was cut. He made 2 more Indiana Jones movies before retiring from the role forever. Okay, well, that's not exactly what happened, but it's probably what should have happened, right? As for Selleck, like I said, Magnum P.I. was a smash hit, and it did lead to him breaking into movies. He actually made not 1, but 2 movies that traded on the fact that he was supposed to play Indiana Jones, starring in the throwback adventure movies High Road to China and Laster. You see, in the early 80s, Raiders of the Lost Ark kind of started this mini trend where everyone was making these 1930s set serials. And High Road to China is actually a pretty cool movie, and it made a decent amount of coin. But Laster, which was more of kind of a Cary Grant-ish type thing set in pre-World War II Germany, flopped, as did 1984's Runaway. For a long, long time, it looked like Selleck as a movie star would never happen, but then he was cast against type in 3 Men and a Baby, which became the biggest movie of 1987 and made him a movie star for a time. Since then, he's had a remarkably consistent career on the small screen, having recently just ended a run on Blue Bloods, which ran like twice the amount of time that Magnum P.I. did. Selleck has always been philosophical about his near-miss with Indiana Jones, and in his autobiography, he reveals that he actually went to see Raiders of the Lost Ark in theaters when it opened in 1981 because he knew it would be great, and it was. Also, It was something that he had to do because he just couldn't live his life avoiding Raiders of the Lost Ark and avoiding seeing Harrison Ford and avoiding hearing the name Indiana Jones. He had to confront it head on. He said that the moment he was sitting in a theater and he saw Ford being chased by a boulder in the opening sequence, a scene that he had read over and over and over again in his script and had down by heart, he knew that Harrison Ford was Indiana Jones and Indiana Jones was Harrison Ford. And in the end, he was fine doing Magnum P.I., and the show in its own way made him a timeless icon. Sometimes things work out the way that they have to, and really, could anyone else have played Indiana Jones but Harrison Ford? I doubt it. I do kind of wonder though, if Tom Selleck had played the role, would we still have gotten Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull? Would the series have gone on for as long as it did? Selleck have gone on to the kind of stardom that Harrison Ford did by choosing really interesting movies like Witness, The Mosquito Coast, and other films? Hard to say. I guess that's one of Hollywood's greatest what-ifs.
Thank you for clicking on our video, everybody. If you like what you saw here, please make sure you like the video and subscribe and share with your friends who like this sort of content. JoBlo was created by movie fans for movie fans, and we appreciate your support.